Alright, today we're going to be talking about the Peloton Tread. Mine broke. Peloton's refusing to fix it because I bought it used, despite the fact that it's less than 18 months old, probably has less than 100 miles on it total. And not only that, they're refusing to provide any kind of repair documentation or parts. So I took it upon myself to take the whole thing apart, figure out what was wrong with it, put it all back together, and now I've documented the process so that if other people run into this problem, which you undoubtedly will, because just kind of looking through some of the Peloton Tread Facebook groups, I see this problem happening all the time. People are saying they're on their third or fourth or fifth decks. So this is clearly a design issue or an assembly issue with the product, and it infuriates me that they're not standing behind it or fixing it regardless of the warranty status. So the purpose of this video is to try to help you understand how to troubleshoot it, figure out what the noise is coming from, and then address it. So after I'm finished kind of explaining the troubleshooting process, I'm going to explain how to break down your tread and get access to various parts. I'm going to set up another video specifically about disassembling the motor and replacing the bearings and reassembling the motor. So just to keep things short, I'm going to have one video based on troubleshooting and disassembly, and then another video specifically about disassembling the motor, replacing the parts, and putting it back together. I hope this video helps you out. I've included links to all of the tools, all of the kind of specialized tools that you might not have currently in the description below. Please click the links. It helps out my channel. I earn a little bit of a commission on it. It doesn't cost you anything. And I've also linked to the very specific things that you need for this project. If you have any questions, just post them in the comments. I do my best to respond to everybody, so happy to help as you're going through this process, and good luck. So to start off with, there's a couple of noises that you might hear. The first one sounds like this. It's kind of like a screeching. The other noise that you might hear is more of like a creaking noise, and it tends to happen at lower speeds, especially like around 1 or 2 miles per hour. It sounds like this. So the first sound, that's squealing, I believe is a bearing. The second sound, that kind of the creaking noise, I believe is caused by the rotor inside of the motor rubbing on the stator. So in both cases for me, the problems were within the motor itself. However, this machine is covered in bearings. It's a very well-made, heavy-duty machine. I don't know why they went wrong with the motors, but it seems like the motors are what's causing the issue. And it's also a high-quality, heavy-duty motor. They just, I don't know if their tolerances were too tight or something, but something's just not quite right. And I think they also over-tightened the drive belt from the factory. So they're over-tightening that belt. It's leading to premature bearing failure. It's also bending things inside of the motor and causing things to rub that shouldn't be rubbing. So if you were going to troubleshoot your machine, first of all, if you're having this problem, I would recommend calling Peloton. If you're under a warranty, they just come out and swap the whole deck. So they say it's non-serviceable, even though clearly it is serviceable. So they'll come out and give you an entirely new deck. Unfortunately, it'll probably have the same inherent design or assembly flaw that the previous one did, and it'll eventually fail as well. But as long as they're willing to do that under warranty, just keep getting new decks, because it's kind of a hassle to take the thing apart. So if you're going to try to fix it yourself, you want to try to isolate where the noise is coming from. And the best way that I found to do this is to put the tread in free mode and move it by hand. And just get your head down there and listen very carefully as you're kind of rolling the belt by hand. And this is what it looks like with the tread belt removed, and I'm turning the motor by hand. Now it's making this noise while the drive belt is installed and tensioned. However, I found that when I reduced the tension or remove the drive belt completely, it didn't make the noise. So it's important when you're troubleshooting to try turning it by hand without taking the tension off the drive belt. Now you can do this by kind of laying out the machine and connecting everything, like in this picture, so you can actually turn it on and put it in free mode to turn it by hand. Or you can use a trick I show a little bit later in this video, using a drill battery to release the brake on the motor, so you can actually turn it by hand without powering the machine on. And try to isolate where it's coming from, because you have essentially, and I'll show a picture here, 2 rows of bearings running across the entire top of the tread that the belt or the tread runs on. And then you also have idler bearings on the underside that kind of deflect it as it's going. And then you have 4 pillow bearings, so 1 in each corner of the tread as well. So there's a lot of different bearings, and bearings can go bad. They can be defective from the beginning, or they can last a really, really long time. So try to isolate where in general the noise is coming from. The other thing that you can do is actually lift the tread up slightly on the top and get your fingers on the bearings and kind of feel them and try to find if there's one that feels bad or is making noises or kind of feels like it's grinding. Because if it's one of the ones across the top, you can actually replace it without removing the entire tread belt. Same thing with the idler bearings and even the pillow bearings. All the bearings are replaceable without taking the belt off with minimal levels of disassembly. You can also fix a slipping belt, so you can tension and untension the belt and also replace the belt completely. And when I say the belt, I'm talking about the actual drive belt. So there's like a little fan belt about that big around that runs from the motor to the actual like front wheels that turn the tread belt. So that's a serviceable part. That's something you're going to have to replace at some point, or you may have to adjust the tension on it. In some cases, reducing the tension may fix your problem. Although if it's making the noise, I would imagine the damage has already been done, potentially, so you might have to take the whole motor out regardless, but you could start off with just reducing the tension on the belt a little bit and see if that helps. However, if it's coming from the motor, which it most likely is, just kind of browsing the forums, it looks like that's 9 times out of 10 the issue, it's coming from the motor. The only way that I'm aware of to get the motor out is to take the tread belt off. There's already a fairly good video from Peloton explaining how to assemble the tread, so you can follow that and then just kind of work in reverse. But essentially, you start off here. There's a plastic cap that goes here that you pop off, and then this back piece pops off as well. You can use those trim removal tools. It helps to kind of see where they're being held on and grab close to that so you don't like break little plastic tabs. Once you get those off, you take off the 2 side pieces here. These are metal, so also the trim removal tools work well for that. There's one on each side. And then you pull these, there's 2 front covers, one on each side. You pull those off, and then you should be able to pull back the cloth. It's over here. So you should be able to pull that back. If there are little plastic tabs in there, you're basically gonna have to cut those out. I was able to successfully remove a few of them, but it was a huge pain and totally not worth it. So better to cut them out and replace them later. So once you do that, you start at the top again. You remove these 4 bolts. There's 2 and 2. Take note, there's a little ground wire connecting the monitor to the chassis. You want to put this back when you reassemble it. This little plug here has a tab on the top. You depress that, pull straight back. That comes off, and then once those bolts are removed, there's 2 tabs that come out here that are supporting the weight of the monitor, so you can take these bolts out without it falling. You lift the monitor kind of up and away, and then carefully put that somewhere else. Next, I would actually, you want 2 people for this. So the first thing I would do is come down here and loosen. There's 6 bolts on each leg. So you have 2 here, 2 here, and 2 on this back side right here. So loosen those up, but don't take them out all the way on both sides. And then come up here, and you have 3 bolts on each arm. And take those out completely while somebody's supporting this weight, and hold it toward the back because it's not weighted evenly. So most of the weight is at the back. Like I said, you should have 6 bolts here. The morons that installed this tread originally stripped out the center one, so I only have 2 here and 3 on that side. You also have 2 little plugs here, so I forgot to mention that. Unhook those plugs before you start taking this piece off. But once those bolts are out, this piece slides off this way. This hole is like a big horseshoe. It slides off straight out. And there's like detents. It's kind of hard to see. Can't really see, but it almost needs to like pop as it goes. So if these arms are loose, that should help out a lot. And then it pulls straight out that way. Set that off to the side somewhere. the left side leg just comes off. So take those bolts out, and it kind of leans away from the machine and lifts up. There's a little tab holding its weight vertically. And then this one you need to be careful with. So basically you kind of pull it away gently, and there are 2 cables running through it with connectors that you might have to feed either out from here to access them, or they might be tucked up inside the leg and you just pull them out a little bit. But there should be enough extra wire to where you can lay it down next to the machine and work on it, but just be careful with those as you're doing that. And then at that point, you've got it disassembled as far as the assembly video covers. The next thing that you'll need to do is start working on this back side. So to get these end caps off, you actually have to pull the fabric away quite a bit, because there's 4 hex bolts on each side that hold them on, and they're not really accessible with that fabric in place. So you pretty much have to remove it. And you're left with this, it's like a pillow bearing. So if you're taking the entire machine apart, you follow the steps that I just went through. If you're just trying to replace the drive belt or tension it, or maybe replace one of the bearings, an idler bearing or bearing across the top, you can skip taking the arms off and the monitor, leave all that on. It'll actually make it a little bit easier, and come straight back here, get access to these by removing those end caps. And then the first thing that you're gonna wanna do is relieve the main tread tension. So the way that you do that is essentially, set my light right here. You've got this main tensioning screw that's used to like push this out this way, and then these which kind of lock it in place. There's one on the top and one on the bottom. So before you do anything with those, I highly recommend marking where this is at. And you can kind of see right there, I use like a marker pen, and there too, to just show me where it was. And you definitely want to do this because Peloton won't provide any documentation as far as how tight this needs to be. So mark it that way so you know how it was set up from the factory, and then you can just move it back into that position and know that it's done right. So once you've done that, you can back this screw out. I went all the way back to where it's kind of even with that slot, and then loosen these 2 bolts, and do the same thing on the other side. And then this should slide that way, taking a lot of tension off this tread. So from there, you should have enough slack to where you can like lift up on it and put like a couple 2x4s under it and get access to the bolts that you need to get access to adjust the drive belt tension, and probably loosen it enough to get the drive belt off and put a new one on, or address one of the idler pulleys or idler bearings, or hundreds of other bearings across the top. And that's really all you need to loosen up in order to access that. But if you need to remove the motor or get inside for some reason, you really have to take the entire tread belt off. And in order to do that, you basically follow the steps that I just outlined, and then you want to take this bracket off. So this whole bracket, these 4 bolts come out. This pillow bearing comes off. There's 2 set screws on each one. One of them goes in an actual keyway on the shaft, so you want to take those, pretty much back them out all the way, or just take them out completely and put them in a plastic baggie and don't lose them. And then you can pull this entire thing off. When you're dealing with these, try to pull and push on them with by this inner race here rather than this outer piece, because they have a tendency to get a little wonky. I kept this one on the right side of the machine, the other one on the left side of the machine, just so I didn't get them mixed up. I don't know if it matters, probably not, but again, better safe than sorry, especially since there's no real documentation provided. Another little trick here to pay attention to of note is this little Zerk fitting on each one. They are facing inward on the rear and outward on the front, and the idea is if you do need to service the machine or grease it, you could potentially do it from the inside cavity without having to take this back cap off, where on the front ones the caps pull off, so it's easier to access them on the front side. So
just kind of pay attention to the orientation as well when you're taking this apart. But once you get these bearings off and these brackets off on both sides, this kind of center axle and these wheels are a little bit more free in there, and you need to turn the machine up onto its side. And then from there, on the underside of the machine, when it's standing on its side, you should have enough slack to pull the belt out and work this out. It kind of goes around this end piece and then toward the bottom of the machine, and then you can actually lift it out, and that gives you a lot more slack. So if you are just trying to adjust the belt tension or replace a bearing across the top, you still have the uprights installed and the screen installed and everything else. And you can actually incline the tread to about, I found 12 degrees worked well and still gave me enough room to tension the motor mount, but also raised it up enough to where I could get underneath it without too much trouble. If you are taking the entire thing apart, the next thing that you're gonna have to do is remove this incline arm, because the tread belt won't come off with it on. So it's kind of a bear. It's harder to put back on than it is to remove it. But to remove it, you have 2 bolts here and here, and then one big one right here. And pay particular attention to this one, because it has like kind of an inner sleeve and then a washer on the outside, and then there's actually a washer that goes between those 2 parts that kind of just stays with it. But just pay attention to everything as you're taking that apart. You really need to flip it on its side, remove all 3 of these, and then rotate it over, flip it to the next side, and remove all 3 on the other side. And then you can pull it straight out. And a little tip, when you're putting this back together, let's see if we can show it here. There's like a bar that runs through the whole machine to the other side. That can pull left and right, or when it's up on its side, up and down. So when you're trying to fit this back on, you need to pull this bar upwards to let the lower version of this, if it's on its side, get under it and into space. And then it takes some like manual twisting and torquing to actually get the holes lined up on both sides. So have fun with that. It's not very much fun. Once you've removed that incline bar and you're ready to take the actual tread belt off, you'll need to turn it back up on its side. This is definitely going to be, well, I say definitely. I did it by myself the first time. I got help to put it back on, and then I got help the second and the third time I took it off. Because it is really heavy and really unwieldy. It just has a tendency to flop around and not hold its shape. So basically you turn it up on its side. I would also highly recommend buying some like clear plastic carpet protecting stuff that you put down, like an adhesive thick plastic, and put it all up and down the side of the metal and kind of wrap it down in there and put it on these edges, and do that on the top side and the bottom side, because the underside of this belt is just covered in little screws. They're like teeth all over this thing. It's so heavy and it's so hard to get off. You're gonna inevitably scratch the finish, and I wish I hadn't, but I did. It's just inevitable. You can see some scratch marks I'm gonna have to touch up, but it's a bear to get off, and I didn't find any better way of doing it. So basically, stand it up on its side, wear gloves, get 2 people, 1 on each end, and just kind of work it up and over and try to protect the metal the best that you can. So when you're ready to reassemble it, you pretty much follow everything in reverse order. Again, put some protectant over the metal, lower the belt down. Hopefully you have help, so 2 sets of hands. A couple things to note. You need to make sure these are lined up on the front when you do put it back together, and it's not urgent for when you're actually like lifting the belt on, but before you start tightening things up, you want to make sure these little screws are kind of falling in their spots. And then on the back side, when it's standing on its side, you can get I get this axle back in with those wheels on it. When I took it out, I laid it kind of in the same position, same orientation, so I knew which side was which. Again, it probably doesn't matter, but just figure it's better than not doing it. And then get the brackets into place and kind of like lift this axle up and get it setting in there the best you can, and then get the pellet bearings on. Start getting those on, get these tightened up, and then before you tighten all this up, just get them started, and then kind of snug but not too snug, and then you're going to want to start tensioning it. So it basically means turning this and pushing this outward. And I did like a little bit on this side, like move it about an inch and then go to the other side, move it about an inch back and forth, rather than doing one of them all at once. And then once you get to where like you're starting to get to your line on one side or the other, get it lined up with your line, and then snug this one down, not crazy tight, but snug. And then that way, when you keep turning this, it'll push the bottom or the top half as well, so you get the exact same orientation. And then once those are tensioned correctly, before I tighten set screws down at all, I put the tread in free mode, and then I turned it by hand, make sure everything was working well. Then I actually turned it with the motor. So I turned it on and ran it like 2 or 3 miles an hour a little bit. And then after I was satisfied everything was moving smoothly, stop the tread. And then you can actually, if you put it in free mode, you're going to need to rotate. I don't know if you can see that, but there's like a keyway in that shaft. You need to rotate it so it lines up with the bigger set screw. So you can actually put it in free mode and hold on to this, or put like a little Allen key in here and slide the belt so it rotates around to get lined up, and then you can tighten these set screws down and you should be good to go. If you do intend to remove the motor from the machine, there is a plug on the control board. So the control board is underneath the plastic panel with about 16 screws holding the panel on. Remove the panel. There's a big plug that needs to be removed, and then there is like a little box. I forget what it's called, but it has little magnets in it to like remove noise from the signal. You have to clip the zip tie, remove that box, take pictures of everything. There's a bunch of zip ties running along the wiring harness up through the side of the machine. So take pictures as you're going so you can put all back the way that it goes. But overall, it's not too much of a pain to get the wires off. The zip ties are kind of specific. They're like push mount zip ties. I will include a link to the replacements that I got in the description. However, they were a little too small for the thickness of the material, and I had to make the little notches on them a little bigger by clipping them with my side snips in order to get them to work. But they were the only ones that I was actually able to find. If you do this, I would recommend just marking kind of where this bracket is, so that you have a point of reference when you're putting it back and tightening it back up. And also feel the belt, just so you have an idea of what the tension should feel like. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I already loosened these, so now I'm just removing them the rest of the way. But they should be a lot tighter than that, obviously. And there are 2 washers on each one, so there's like a smaller lock washer, followed by the bigger silver one. I just leave them on there if you can, that way you remember how they go. Now there's essentially 2 bolts holding this bracket on. There's one here on the top, and then an identical one underneath going on the bottom side. And those are 6mm hex heads. So go ahead and loosen these. And these are going to come all the way out. Now you may notice a 3rd hex head right over here on the back side right there. That one doesn't need to be removed or adjusted. That's actually for kind of tilting the motor or the bracket. So these kind of pull it in, and then that one twists it so you can get it parallel as you continue to tighten it. But leaving that in place is probably a good idea. This shouldn't fall off, but I would put your hand here just to be safe. All right, so those are loose. So now when you actually, change the angle a little bit. I'm gonna put on gloves because this motor is very heavy. All right, I haven't weighed it, but if I had to guess, I'd say it weighs at least 50 pounds. So be prepared. Because once you get it clear of this, once the bracket's clear of that brace, you're going to be supporting all of its weight and it will want to fall. So remember, one end of this is coming through the pulley to the belt. So you can kind of like start to work it off. Move it this way a little bit without dropping it all the way off to get the belt off. Just kind of unhook it from the end there, and then that way that'll be one less thing holding you up. And remember, you are still connected with the wires, so you want to kind of get it clear, and then now we go straight down. So to reinstall the motor and retension the belt, you essentially want to lift the motor assembly back in and slide the bracket over this this brace right here to support the weight of it, and then you can put these two bolts in and just thread them lightly to kind of hold it in place and take the weight off of it so it doesn't fall off. But you want to leave these loose for the time being. So once it's in place, you can kind of work it in there, work the pulley into its hole over here, and then get the belt seated. And it does look like the pulley has more grooves than the belt has grooves. So I ended up putting mine on the outside most groove rather than toward the inside because it looked most aligned with this other pulley that way. And then the tensioning is accomplished with 3 bolts. So essentially, if we come around to the back, these are 6mm hex bolts. These two, the top and bottom one, basically pull the bracket in, and then this one pushes out to twist it or torque it in this direction, I guess counterclockwise, if you're looking down on it. And you can see on the frame I marked with like a paint pen ahead of time to get an idea of where it was. And I also took note of what the belt tension felt like before I took it apart. So I recommend doing that before you take it apart so you can get an idea. But I also noticed that the whole motor was crooked initially, like it just didn't look right. I think maybe that contributed to the bearing failing early. So you'll notice my mark here is not parallel with the way it is currently. So I think it's much more properly installed now, even though it doesn't line up perfectly. A quick tip on retensioning the actual drive belt. So because Peloton won't provide any documentation about how to properly do this, pay attention to the actual tension when you're taking off so you can try to match it. But one trick that I found is to once you've tensioned it, try turning the main like wheels that the tread belt sits on, and make sure that the friction between the belt and the pulley on the motor is enough that you can overcome the brake on the motor. And what I mean by that is if you try to force it to turn, even though the brake's applied, it should still turn the pulley, should turn the motor shaft, despite the fact that the brake is engaged. If the belt is slipping when the brake is engaged, it's not tight enough. And once you get it the way that you want it and the belt feels tight, then you tighten these two down and these essentially hold it in place. So to remove it, you do the opposite sequence. You loosen these and then you can loosen these guys and it all comes apart, and then put it back together. Just put these in lightly, tighten these, try to tighten them evenly. You can reach down underneath and feel to like make sure the same amount's coming out on each side. And then once you're happy with that and you're happy with it, whether or not it's parallel, using this adjustment as well, you can tighten those down and you're good to go.